Okay, second crisis, Venezuela. This is an example to understand that in addition to the three that I gave you, who's going to help me, what are my tools, and what am I trying to achieve, you ask yourself, why didn't we start this problem, see this problem earlier? Right? Venezuela has been going from bad to worse for at least a decade. The Chavez regime, Hugo Chavez, destroyed what was once a middle-income country with their crazy economic policies and Chavistas. Maduro comes in after Chavez dies. Maduro is Chavez without charm. And so it's, the situation reaches a really kind of critical point. This is a country, middle-income country, where people can't get medicine, people can't get food. And it now has become a crisis for the region because refugees from Venezuela are flooding across the borders, particularly into Colombia. So when I ask myself, who can I get to help me? Well, now I know that I've got at least those allies in the Andean region who are as worried, if not more worried than I am about the refugee flows. So I now might want to go to something called the Organization of American States. I know that the big countries of the Organization of American States, Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Chile, are very anti-Maduro, and that I might be able to organize them. And you're always better off from both a perception and a reality point of view if you can have somebody else in the lead. So, because the United States brings us, we're big and powerful and people don't always like that, so Organization of American States can do it. And that's what they did. They got the Organization of American States to take the lead, and then they brought along other countries, several of the Europeans and so forth, who were also willing to help. What tools do I have? Well, now I've got a pretty powerful international alliance against Maduro. And that probably means that sanctions are going to be pretty effective. Although, of course, the country is such a mess that it's a wonder how much more sanctions can do. But I'm now going to try to isolate the Maduro government and put pressure. And what am I hoping to do? Yes, I'm hoping he will leave, but how do I expect to get that done? Somebody will turn on him. People, particularly in the military, will turn on him. But I make a little miscalculation, right? And that miscalculation is this. I don't account properly for the role of the Cubans. The Cubans are in Venezuela in large numbers, Cuban military, and they're not really there to fight. They're there to run counterintelligence missions against the Venezuelan military. They're there to say, General, I know where your family lives. And so you don't get the turn in quite the same way that you thought you would get with Maduro. By the way, the Russians, who I still can't figure out what they're doing here, the Russians decide they're going to swoop down and help. And I must ask myself, could I have stopped that? Is there something called overflight that I might have been able to keep the Russians from intervening? But now you've got a stalemate. So now the what do you want to do, what are you going to do becomes, okay, I guess I'm going to try to wait him out, which is essentially what they're doing. And more pressure, hold the coalition together and see if you can wait him out. So that's a way to think about the Venezuelan hotspot and the policy options. The most complex one that we've got is how to deal with China. And that's because China is a rising power. Those of you who've studied international politics or history will know that the world doesn't do that well with rising powers. The last time there was a peaceful rise of a power was actually the United States. Who allowed it? Britain. Somebody called it a handoff because, of course, same values, basically same language, a lot of history, some of it not so great, but most of the history pretty good. So now you've got a rising power that's challenging the system. And what's even more complex about it is it's challenging the system from within it. The Soviet Union never accounted for more than 1% of its GDP in international trade. It was a completely isolated system. And in fact, it was really kind of easy to deal with because what was good for the Soviet Union was bad for the United States. What was bad for the United States was good for the Soviet Union. We defeated their hockey team. We thought we defeated their system. It was, you know, the Soviet Union was perfect. It was really simple. China's not so simple. And so now the question is, how do you deal with this rising power? And just to briefly, we had kind of two ideas about it. One was they're a security threat, you have to contain them, et cetera. That was sort of the military view. The other was the CEO version. It's a big market, I have to be there, I can manufacture there, they're the low cost of labor. And now people are frustrated because it looks like China took advantage of that and didn't open its markets and favored its national champions. And that then leads to the three questions. Who can I get to go along? What tools do I have, and what am I trying to do? The tools the president's chosen are tariffs to try to pressure the Chinese economy, and he's betting that the Chinese economy will give before the international economy does, and the international economy will be okay until the United States, because the United States needs growth in the international economy. It's a big bet, but that's the answer to the tools question. There are other tools, for instance, trying to prevent China from getting certain kinds of technology. That's the Huawei episode that you're reading about. Not allowing Huawei to put in the new 5G network, so trying to isolate China technologically. Some people have even argued universities should not allow Chinese students into AI or quantum computing labs. I personally think that'd be a disaster for universities, but people are trying to assess the tools for a problem that's really gotten out ahead of where we thought it was. The question of who will come along, well, you would think that all of the countries that are challenged by China might come along, certainly in the region, Japan, Korea, et cetera. You might also think, though, you know, but there's also this countervailing force. What about the Russians? Are they going to bandwagon with the Chinese to try to balance the United States? And so in this case, the who to bring along is really complicated. In Europe in particular, our best allies in Europe, their economic relations with China make them less willing to challenge China. And then there's the question of what are you trying to do? You're really trying to stop China's rise? You're trying to channel China's rise? What is the idea? The idea had been that if we integrated China into the international system, brought China into the World Trade Organization early, China would somehow become what my deputy, when I was secretary, called a responsible stakeholder in the international system and would embrace the system of 1945. That clearly hasn't happened. So I'll just leave the question. Now what are we trying to do? And I think the biggest problem is nobody's actually really answered that question. Okay, over to you.